Palworld vs. Pokemon controversy explained. The newly released Palworld is being accused of copying Pokemon designs, with fans of the latter highlighting similarities between the critters. Pokemon is soon celebrating 28 years since the franchise was first established, probably releasing new trailers and announcements about upcoming games on Pokemon Day. There's a Pokemon Day? When's Pokemon Day? Enter Palworld, a new title from Pocket Pair that uses cute Pokemon-like critters to help players build structures and survive in the wilds. While Palworld and Pokemon games are hardly comparable on a gameplay level, with the former getting the nickname of Pokemon with guns, Pocket Pair's new early access release does share quite a lot of DNA. Okay, let's look at the stolen designs. Here's CEO of Pocket Pair talking about using AI to bypass copyright, generating fake mons with it, calling AI art imposter a real-time image generation game, and being excited for games powered by GPT-4. Okay, let's have a look. This is their CEO, apparently. If you pass it to the filter of AI, the image is often not a specific thing, so maybe the copyright issue will be resolved. I was surprised to see that the world is actually moving in that direction. In about 30 years, the general public perception of copyright may have changed considerably. AI has evolved so much that I can no longer tell which is a Pokemon. Left, like monster generated by AI. Right, real Pokemon. Okay, so they are quite obviously talking about generating AI Pokemon. No, instead, please play AI art imposter. This is a real-time image generation game, requires 4 friends. I recently saw the same thing in a video game and had the same impression. We might see true AI-powered games on GPT-4 this year. They also wrote a whole article about making the Palworld, and in describing how quickly their new graduate artist they hired was able to create designs. I mean, this is not massively compelling at the moment, but it is leading to something. But I have seen a couple images of also them copying Hollow Knight in a different game that's being made. So this is like another game that they're developing called Nevergrave, and it is so clearly just Hollow Knight. This is the same company basically. And ultimately, copies do exist. Like, ultimately people will rip people off, but like I also think it's like dangerous precedent for like the company to be doing only this. The next game from Pocket Pair is now being compared to one of the best Metroidvania games ever, Hollow Knight, according to Nevergame's stream page. It is also an enemy possession system, base building, and multiplayer with all these mechanics not present in Hollow Knight itself. CEO Takura Mizobi has always talked about generally using inspiration in Pocket Pair's games in an interview from a few years back. The following has been machine translated. I've always loved Nintendo games and that hasn't changed. I also deeply respect them. However, when it comes to making games, Nintendo has a strong philosophy of creating new and unique games with high quality, and this was questioned at the Nintendo Game Seminar. On the other hand, I have a deep-rooted desire for my work to be enjoyed by as many people as possible, and to that end, if there are good ideas in the world, I pick them up, and I don't necessarily have to be particular about originality. I'm thinking about it. I want to make it more casually. I think it'd be a good idea to create things in a way that just jumps on what is trendy, lol. Wow, that is a damning quote. Incredible to just say in an interview. We've also got a complete Palworld guide. If you don't give a shit about this controversy, here's a bunch of guides for Palworld. That is some damning evidence, to be honest. To be like, I mean, this is like pretty blatantly ripping off. And if that guy's whole philosophy is just like, I don't really care about making new things, I just want to take ideas and make shit out of the ideas that I stole. Which again, it's like, it's not strictly illegal or anything. It's more just ethics, right? This isn't a question of legality, because I don't think even doing this is necessarily illegal, because if you add a bunch of mechanics, then this isn't ripping off. Similarly with Palworld, like other people have made Pokemon-like games, and you know, so many people have talked about like Genshin Impact being like a budget Breath of the Wild, right? But that's where like ethics comes into play, and everybody draws their own line of like what they think is unethical and what's excessive and what's not. This feels a bit shitty though. The sad thing is that it seems to be so successful, despite being so rip-offy. I can't believe the hardest part to believe is that a game called Palworld was ever successful. Again, it does feel AI generated, right? It's like, AI, tell me a name of a game that sounds family friendly and accessible. Palworld, come make pals. Copying Hollow Knight is kind of lame, but Pokemon is the biggest entertainment franchise in history, so I think they'll be okay if someone copies their designs a bit. I think it's okay to own what's happening without trying to downplay it and like water it. And this is just generally true in any discussion of anything that has any vague amounts of nuance. I don't think Pokemon being a giant franchise necessarily alleviates you from very directly ripping it off, right? Like, it's one thing to be like, who isn't influenced by Pokemon, right? Like, anyone who would make any vaguely game like this, like with animal taming, will no doubt be influenced by Pokemon because of how massive it's been, in the same way that like any filmmaker will be influenced by, you know, certain films and certain filmmakers. If I was to just literally rip off another guy's film and make it for myself and then be like, I don't even think making original films is much of a thing that anyone should do. I just like taking other people's ideas. That would be pretty damning. Now, on the other hand, it isn't conclusive in the sense that like we don't know that they directly used AI to generate their Pokemon-like things. And there's enough ambiguity to say, okay, they probably have ripped off a lot of stuff, but they've also added a lot of nice things that I like playing and I enjoy it, and I'm fine playing Palworld, even though some of what they're doing is a little bit shady, because ultimately we all have to make some compromises of our ethics to live in society, right? It's like, do I like unfiltered microtransactions? No, but I think Overwatch falls on the fair line of it, right? Like, I think Overwatch is fine. It's not as bad as it could be. Would I prefer it to be better? Yes, I would, but I accept it for how it is. And similarly, like, you know, with Hogwarts Legacy or whatever, you make your own peace with it, right? For some people, supporting it and therefore supporting J.K. Rowling was too much. For other people, they were capable of holding hatred towards J.K. Rowling and transphobia, but also, hey, I like Harry Potter, I want to play this game, and I'm gonna play it. And that's okay. Like, you can make peace with those things, but what's shitty to me is when people try to downplay what's happening to then make peace with it, right? Like, I think when people were like, oh, it's not such a big deal, like, who really cares about blah, blah, blah. Just own your ethics in that sense, right? Just own what you're saying and be honest about it. Again, I do think that in general we kind of gravitate towards like flimsy ripoffs, because I think if you look at successful films, they're so cheap and uninspiring as well, right? Like, you think of like the success of Marvel films. After a few initial cool ideas, most of them just became repetitive Marvel formulas, but people really loved it because they like the familiar. I think what people really dislike is actually being challenged, even though truly, you know, generational art that stays with you is often challenging, or at least risky and, you know, different. Comforting things are not. Comforting things are the opposite. Comforting things are familiar to the point of like never challenging you, never surprising you, but just unfamiliar enough to keep things feeling relatively fresh, even if it's just for a week. Because to be honest, that's the lifespan of so many games these days. It's like they're popular for like a week and then they're not popular anymore, right? Like for like a month ago, everyone was talking about Lethal Company, and now I don't hear anyone talking about Lethal Company. Or before that, people talking about Among Us, and that lasted for a while, but now nobody talks about Among Us, right? So the staying power of games is often very low if they don't actually just have a big developer behind them or are genuinely transformational and revolutionary. In general, there are, of course, again, exceptions. So I feel like that's just the success of Palworld doesn't surprise me. In the same way that Hogwarts Legacy was the most sold game last year in 2023, despite the controversy. Ultimately, if you tell people you can play in a game where you're like a new recruit in Hogwarts, of course people are going to play it because they love Hogwarts. No matter what they may feel about J.K. Rowling, it is a beloved franchise for lots of people that they grew up with and that they have emotional attachment to. And that's hard to meld with your dislike for J.K. Rowling or even transphobia. So yeah, I think in a similar way, even if Palworld is a little bit flimsy and derivative, ultimately people, if you tell people, hey, there's a MMO for Pokemon that also has guns in it or whatever, then people are going to be like, yeah, heck yeah, I want to play that, even if it feels flimsy. Sometimes the flimsiness is part of it, right? Sure, it's funny that it's kind of clearly a Pokemon ripoff. That like only amuses me more. I think part of the reason for Palworld's success is also people's frustration with the declining quality of the recent Pokemon games. Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen a lot of people talk about how bad Pokemon games have gotten. Or this is their way of lashing out, or perhaps getting a need fulfilled. It's like, hey, okay, this might be a little bit cheap and flimsy, but it's doing what I needed from a Pokemon game. So like all those factors do play. There's a difference between support the art/artist and supporting a major shift to human creation. However shitty J.K. Rowling is, she doesn't have the impact AI will. Yes, like AI is like a whole reckoning. And transphobia is a reckoning too for a lot of people. So it's, again, everyone has their own lines and importances. I'm never one to like preach to people that they should care more for a thing than is necessarily present, as long as they're vaguely open to caring about it, right? Like if someone was like, I don't care about transphobia, I'd be like, well, that's a bit shitty of you. You should think about that. But if someone's like, I care about transphobia, but look, I also love Harry Potter, I can understand that. And similarly, AI as well, like it is going to be a huge reckoning. But I also understand that if you're someone who's not particularly involved in AI-based fields, or you don't know too much about it, you might be like, I'm interested, but I'm not going to like actively avoid everything to do with AI, right? It is going to be a big reckoning, especially the creative field. Like it's already being used in businesses, but it's definitely going to have a huge reckoning for the creative field, because that's where it might be a dystopian outcome. My brother used AI to cut his workload. It now takes him a minute to do a job it usually takes hours to do. And yeah, again, it's kind of like, you can understand, I mean, again, that's where AI has its productive uses. And then you can also understand people who are like, let's say like you're a content creator and you need a thumbnail done done and you don't have the time to do thumbnail work yourself, you haven't got the expertise on it, and you can't afford to pay a thumbnail artist, and so you're like, I'm just gonna use this AI to generate a thumbnail. Is that unethical? You know, it's a gray issue, right? It's like you could argue both ways on that one. It's obviously a lot different when it's a giant company doing it. Anytime you're like a company doing things, it's different to individuals doing things. Just like ripping off people's work without compensating them is like deeply bad. Art used to be a very narrow field in years gone by, right? Like hundreds of years ago. If you wanted to, like, if you wanted to paint or sculpt or something, you usually had to be like from a really wealthy background, right? Like books, authors, right? You had to be like not many people were even literate, right? Like it was a privilege to be afforded literacy and taught how to read and write. And then to have the time luxury to sit and write a novel was often just something that only upper class people could do. And so in the last like 100 years, especially the last 50, we've had like an explosion of art being opened up to everyone, right? Like with the digital age, everyone could make music, for example, right? Everyone could download a music software and start making beats. Everyone can write and get themselves published. You can have blog posts and websites that you can make for yourself. And we have Etsy now, so you can make little nifty gadgets and sell them to anyone around the world. So we created a bunch of awesome systems that opened up art for everyone to do and for more people to be able to use them as a genuine career, which is amazing. Like more people should be free to be artists because like it enriches our lives. We've all consumed things that are like just made by some random person somewhere. Like the posters behind me, right? Like they're just made by an independent artist who makes cool shit. Like not the Zelda one, but like the Teen Titans one, or there's a Kiki's Delivery Service. I don't know if it'll come up on frame here, but there's a poster from Kiki's Delivery Service there. And it's like that enriches my life. And every time I see it, I feel a little bit better, right? But if like AI ripping people off becomes so dominant that like what it will do is slowly narrow the field again so that the lowest end of people will never be able to like become artists for a living, because the first people to get chopped off are going to be the people who are like at the bottom, right? So as we spoke about, the people who are just starting off as, let's just continue the theme of like thumbnail artists, right? When you start as a thumbnail artist, you're gonna charge like very little because you're still learning, and then as you build up your portfolio, you're gonna have more clients, you're gonna have had more experience, better skills. And then you can start charging more, and at somewhere along the line, you're kind of making a decent living out of that kind of graphic design work, right? But if AI tools can just like rip off other people's work and just throw them out there, not only does it hurt the people who made the thing in the first place, who aren't getting their fair due for the work they did, but then the first people to go are going to be that like bottom end of people, because rather than getting a cheap work done by a human, you'll get cheap work done by an AI because it'll be even cheaper, right? It'll be like dirt cheap and mass consumption, right? You can probably like subscribe to the AI because the AI doesn't actually need to feed itself. It's just like once it's made, it's just permanent money going into a company somewhere. So the AI can like cheap labor, like basically like sweatshop labor, the work that needs to be done. And if you subscribe for like $10 a month, that's way better. You can make as many thumbnails as you want from your AI software than having to pay a guy, which again, to some extent is good, but it will also, again, the cascading effect is that then we don't have people like artists who would have been artists will never be artists, right? The people who will most afford to be able to continue to do cool creative stuff in that climate are people who are like privileged and can afford to like either get fancy education and qualifications or spend a lot of time unemployed as they continue to build up their art portfolio, right? So privileged rich kids whose parents can afford to fund them while they pursue their dream of becoming a graphic designer will be the only people allowed to succeed anymore. And the people who will suffer the most are the people who always suffer the most, the people who have the least, right? The people who can't, who previously could have maybe made something, made a living there, made ends meet, and they won't be able to do it anymore. So we'll go back to a system where only the privileged can do art, which is a horrible thing to be. We don't want that. To ease your work burden is cool potentially, right? It's like, it's good in the same way. It's like the same thing as like when machinery came about, right? Like when machinery came about, it made working easier for humans, and it solved tasks that we didn't really want to do but had to do. So in the same way, AI can do that and provide a similar revolution. The difference is that now it's replacing the very essence of what it means to be human, which is to create and innovate. And if it can like sterilize that process to the point of creating shitty ripoffs that don't add anything new to anything, then we're kind of in trouble. So yeah, that's my thoughts largely on the whole situation.